Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is June 24th. Picture this. It's the dead of night, somewhere in the early morning hours of June 24th, 1812, on the western bank of the Niemen River, the border between Napoleon's empire and Russia. Engineers are working in silence, laying down 3 pontoon bridges across the water. By dawn, they're ready. And then, one of the most powerful military forces Europe had ever seen began to cross. What followed over the next 6 months would become one of the most catastrophic military campaigns in recorded history. A story of staggering ambition, fatal miscalculation, and a landscape so vast and merciless it swallowed armies whole. Let's back up 5 years, because this moment on the Niemen River didn't come out of nowhere. In 1807, after Napoleon decisively crushed the Russian army at the Battle of Friedland, he and Tsar Alexander I met to negotiate peace. The location was deliberate and theatrical, a raft moored in the middle of the Niemen River. The two emperors met, apparently charmed each other, and came away with the treaties of Tilsit. Russia agreed to join Napoleon's continental system, a large-scale embargo designed to strangle Britain's economy by cutting off its trade with continental Europe. The alliance held, but only for a few years. By 1810, Russia was bleeding economically. The continental system was strangling Russian trade just as much as British trade. Tsar Alexander opened Russian ports to neutral shipping, which allowed British goods to slip back in. From Napoleon's perspective, this was a betrayal. From Alexander's perspective, it was survival. On top of that, Napoleon had carved out the Duchy of Warsaw from Polish territory, right on Russia's doorstep, and was making noise about restoring a Polish state outright. That prospect terrified the Tsar, who saw it as a direct threat to Russian territorial integrity. By early 1812, war between France and Russia wasn't a matter of if, it was when. Napoleon's answer to when was now, and his answer to how was overwhelmingly. The initial invasion force that crossed the Niemen numbered approximately 453,000 men. In total, about 612,000 soldiers would enter Russia over the course of the campaign, and little more than 200,000 of them were actually French. The Grand Army was, in reality, a European coalition. Poles, Germans, Italians, Dutch, Austrians, and Prussians, all marching under the French imperial eagle. 2 days before the crossing, on June 22nd, Napoleon issued a proclamation to his troops. He called this the Second Polish War. He said, "Let us then march forward. Let us pass the Niemen. Let us carry the war into her territory." In the early hours of June 24th, at a bend in the Niemen River south of Kovno, present-day Kaunas, Lithuania, the Grand Army began to cross on 3 wooden bridges built during the night. It seemed, in that moment, almost too easy. Napoleon's strategic logic was straightforward. Get deep enough into Russian territory fast enough to force a decisive battle near the border, destroy the Russian army in the field, and compel Alexander to the negotiating table before summer ended. He had done this to virtually every other European power. He had no reason to believe Russia would be different. His goal was never to conquer Russian land. It was to destroy the Russian armies and force the Tsar back into the continental system. But the Russians had no interest in playing by Napoleon's rules. The main Russian field forces were organized into 3 armies spread across the western frontier. The First Western Army under Mikhail Barclay de Tolly, the second under Prince Pyotr Bagration, and the third under Alexander Tormozov. Rather than stand and fight near the border, the roughly 120,000 Russian troops in Napoleon's immediate path simply fell back, allowing the French to occupy their headquarters at Vilnius on June 28th without a real engagement. The Russian strategy was repeated retreat to draw the French in deeper. And as they retreated, the Russians implemented scorched earth, destroying crops, livestock, and infrastructure in an effort to exhaust the Grand Army invaders. Barclay de Tolly moved quickly to ensure the invaders found nothing. French follow-on units arrived in village after village to discover deserted homes, ravaged fields, and vital resources destroyed or removed. There would be no living off the land. There would be no supplies waiting in captured towns. There would be nothing. The Grand Army was already dying before it fought a single major battle, punishing marches over primitive road systems in searing summer heat and choking dust, interrupted by freezing rainstorms that turned the roads into muddy bogs, left heavy supply wagons far behind. Columns steadily lost men and horses from thirst, hunger, and exhaustion, not from Russian bullets. The logistics of moving 500,000 men across an enormous, underdeveloped landscape were simply beyond what Napoleon's supply chain could handle. However, the Russians couldn't retreat forever. Public pressure and military honor demanded a stand. The armies of Barclay de Tolly and Prince Bagration united at Smolensk. From August 16th to 18th, the two sides fought there. The French gained the city, but at high cost, and it was nowhere near enough to gain strategic control. The Russian army retreated again, still intact. Then came Borodino. On September 7th, 1812, about 70 miles west of Moscow, the two sides finally met in the open field. Napoleon had been chasing a decisive engagement for over 2 months, and he got one. He just didn't get the outcome he needed. Borodino marked the bloodiest single day of the Napoleonic Wars. Roughly 70 to 80,000 men killed or wounded. The French technically won the field, but the Russian army was not destroyed. It retreated in order, battered but intact. Napoleon had arguably his one critical decision point of the entire campaign at Borodino, and he blinked. He refused to commit his Imperial Guard, his most powerful reserve force, to deliver the killing blow. He wanted to preserve them for negotiations he was sure were coming. Some historians argue that this refusal may have cost Napoleon his last chance at victory. A week later, on September 14th, the Grand Army marched into Moscow and found it empty. The Russian civilian population had largely evacuated. Then, almost immediately, fires broke out across the city, probably aided by Russian authorities determined to deny Moscow to the French, though historians still debate exactly how much of the destruction was deliberate. The city burned for days. Napoleon watched the flames from the Kremlin before being forced to flee to Petrovsky Palace as the flames threatened the complex itself. He settled in and waited for Alexander to send peace terms. Alexander never did. After more than a month in a smoldering, hollowed-out city with winter approaching and no functioning supply line, Napoleon finally accepted the reality. There would be no treaty. He ordered the retreat on October 19th. During the retreat, Napoleon's army suffered continual harassment from Russian forces, stalked by hunger, subzero temperatures, and the Russian cavalry that seemed to materialize from every tree line. They were forced back along the same devastated route they had advanced, finding nothing. No food, no shelter, and no warmth. The decimated army reached the Berezina River in late November, near the border with French-occupied Lithuania. The river was unexpectedly thawed, and the Russians had destroyed the bridges at Borisov. Napoleon's engineers managed to construct 2 makeshift bridges under fire, and on November 26th, the bulk of the surviving army began to cross. The fighting at the Berezina cost between 25,000 and 40,000 men, along with most of their remaining baggage and equipment. The campaign officially ended on December 14, 1812, when the last survivors crossed back over the Niemen River, going in the opposite direction. Most of the 450,000 men who had crossed into Russia that June never returned. Total deaths across all sides, soldiers and civilians, have been estimated at around 1 million. So what went wrong? The Russian winter gets most of the credit, or the blame, in popular memory. But that's an oversimplification. The army was already in crisis in July, in the heat of summer. The problems were structural. A supply system that could never feed an army this large across distances this vast. An enemy that refused to cooperate with Napoleon's preferred style of warfare, and a political objective of forcing Alexander back into the continental system that was never going to be achievable through military pressure alone. Napoleon had spent his entire career winning wars by moving fast, concentrating force, and achieving a decisive knockout blow early. Russia was simply too large, too deep, and too willing to sacrifice its own territory to deny him that knockout. The campaign destroyed the myth of Napoleonic invincibility. Within 2 years, a coalition of European powers would force him to abdicate. Within 3 years, the entire Napoleonic order would be finished. Much of what followed traces back here, to 3 pontoon bridges, a foggy morning on the Niemen River. That same day, different century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening.